In the previous video, we examined the body's intentionality as expressed in the mode of the I can, its capacity for action and orientation in the world. Merleau-Ponty argues that bodily intentionality is not a singular faculty, but manifests in multiple interwoven forms, each illuminating a distinct mode of being in the world. Chapter 4 explores the integrated synthesis that unifies our bodily experience, while Chapter 5 builds on this by investigating a particular modality of bodily intentionality, that being sexuality, not merely as a biological function, but as a pervasive affective orientation through which the world becomes meaningful. In Chapter 4, Merleau-Ponty examines our experience of the body not as a detached object in space, but as the very condition through which space becomes meaningful. Rather than being merely situated among other objects, the body constitutes a dynamic, lived center of perception and movement. His central argument is that we inhabit space through the body, and our spatial awareness emerges from an embodied engagement with the world. Merleau-Ponty begins by contrasting his view with traditional philosophy, particularly Descartes and Kant, who define objects in terms of their measurable spatial boundaries. He argues that our experience of our own body does not conform to this model. The body does not present itself to us as an external, object-like thing. Rather, it is the primary medium through which we engage with the world. It's not merely one object among others, but the very condition for perceiving and relating to objects in the very first place. Space in this view becomes meaningful only when it is lived through the body. When we reach for a cup of coffee, for instance, we don't consciously calculate its location. We simply act. This demonstrates a bodily understanding of space that is immediate and practical. Our sense of proximity, orientation, and movement is not derived from abstract measurements, but arises from direct embodied engagement with the world. Merleau-Ponty calls this embodied understanding a primitive spatiality, that is, a basic pre-reflective form of spatial awareness. Unlike abstract or representational conceptions, which treat spatial understanding as the result of mental mapping or conceptual synthesis, primitive spatiality arises from our immediate lived relation to the environment. It reflects how we are always already oriented toward the world prior to conscious reflection or deliberation. To have a body, in this sense, is to always already be embedded in a meaningful world. Merleau-Ponty then turns to the idea of bodily unity. He explains that the different parts and functions of the body, sight, touch, movement, don't just coordinate with each other like parts of a machine. Instead, they are deeply interwoven. When you reach for a phone, for instance, your body spontaneously organizes itself to accomplish the action without needing to consciously direct every part. Even young children, when reaching, look at the object rather than their hand, indicating an intuitive sense of bodily unity. He also notes that we can't imagine parts of our body that are never directly accessible to vision, like our face or the back, because we have an internal sense of bodily coherence that isn't dependent upon visual recognition. In fact, people often fail to recognize their own hand in a photo, but can easily recognize their walk or silhouette. This shows, for Merleau-Ponty, that our experience of the body is based on a deeper, lived connection rather than just appearance. Critically, Merleau-Ponty argues that this unity is not something we piece together over time, that it's given all at once. We don't stand apart from our bodies and observe them. We are the ones who bring the parts of our body together into a meaningful whole. And he draws on Leibniz to describe the body here as the effective law of its own changes. That is, the body interprets itself as it moves and perceives. Different sensations, sight, touch, movement, are instantly connected through our bodily disposition, how we gesture, carry ourselves, and act in the world. And in this light, he compares the body to a work of art. Just as you can't fully grasp a poem by reducing it to a paraphrase, you can't reduce the body's meaning to physical laws or abstract descriptions. The body is a living system of meanings where one sensation implies others, not because they all fit into a concept, but because they participate in the same activity. Feeling something with one part of your arm relates to how the whole arm functions in that moment. Finally, he explores the role of habit in shaping our bodily experience. Habits, whether physical, perceptual, or motor, help form the body's unity. And a good example is a visually impaired individual using a cane. At first, the cane is just an object, but with use, it becomes part of the person's bodily space. The sense of touch extends to the tip of the cane. Similarly, perceptual habits like learning to distinguish colors involve the body adapting to the world by acquiring new styles of perception. These habits reshape how we experience ourselves in the world, deepening and modifying our body image. And so Merleau-Ponty sees the body not as an object possessed by a thinking self, but as a dynamic system of lived meanings. New experiences can shift our sense of bodily equilibrium, helping us integrate past movements and sensations into more complex, meaningful wholes. Moving on to chapter 5, it contends that sexuality is deeply embedded in our embodied existence, linking the body, affectivity, and our overall mode of being. Merleau-Ponty suggests that if we want to understand how things begin to exist for us, we have to look to affective life, especially desire and love, as the birthplace of meaning. In this way, he positions sexuality not as a separate instinct or function, but as a mode of bodily intentionality through which the world becomes meaningful. Rather than viewing sexuality through reductionistic, biological, or psychological lenses, it is a lived bodily orientation toward the world, integral to how we perceive others, form relationships, and constitute our sense of self. Through this particular intentionality, we gain insight into how, more broadly, affectivity is not a mosaic of internal states or conditioned reactions, but a structuring force that reveals how the body makes sense of the world. To illustrate this embodied basis of sexuality, Merleau-Ponty revisits the case of Schneider, the patient whose brain injury also resulted in a profound disruption of erotic perception. Schneider no longer spontaneously initiates or responds to sexual situations. His desire lacks affective continuity, and his perception of others is flattened and abstract. This detachment is not due to sensory or cognitive deficits, he can still see and feel, but to a more fundamental disruption in the body's intentional arc. He no longer experiences the world erotically because his body no longer poses the mute question to the world. That is, a pre-reflective openness to erotic significance. This breakdown of erotic intentionality parallels Schneider's broader affective disengagement. He's unmoved by beauty, emotionally indifferent to others, and unable to sustain friendships. His affective life has become abstract and disengaged. Merleau-Ponty interprets this as evidence that sexuality is not an isolated domain, but part of a larger bodily intentionality that integrates perception, emotion, movement, and thought. When this collapses, as in the case of Schneider, the result is a broader existential alienation. He can no longer situate himself affectively in the world at all, and his loss of erotic perception reveals how profoundly our bodily orientation shapes our meaningful engagement with life. Merleau-Ponty then enters into dialogue with Freud to explore how psychoanalysis reveals the meaningfulness of bodily symptoms. He affirms Freud's insight that symptoms are not merely physiological, but express what he calls here existential conflicts. Conditions such as aphonia or sexual dysfunction are not organic failures, but bodily expressions of a troubled relation to the world. However, Merleau-Ponty departs from Freud's instinct-based model. He reinterprets libido not as a biological drive, but as the subject's general power to invest in the world, to form relationships, take on styles of conduct, and inhabit affective situations. He also resists certain extreme positions. The claim that everything is sexual ultimately dilutes the meaning of the term. But he also resists the idea of the claim that sexuality is merely symbolic of broader structures. Instead, sexuality is coextensive with existence. It reveals and is shaped by our being in the world without being reducible to it. As an expressive structure, sexuality makes visible the existential style of a person, their way of living in relation to others and the world. Merleau-Ponty thus retools psychoanalysis, positioning it as a method for grasping the expressive embodied nature of human existence, rather than as a science of hidden causes. Chapter 5 concludes by showing that sexuality is a privileged site for uncovering the ambiguity of human existence. We're not merely minds inhabiting bodies, nor bodies governed by instincts. We are embodied beings whose experience is always layered, affective, and relational. Sexuality makes this ambiguity demonstrable, residing at the crossroads of biology, affectivity, and social norms and symbolic meanings, and yet also being irreducible to all of them. This complexity emerges most clearly in the erotic dialect of self and other. In desiring another, I experience myself as both subject and object, as one who acts and one who is acted upon, who gazes and is gazed upon. Erotic encounters thus involve a continual oscillation between autonomy and vulnerability. As with Sartre's account of the gaze, which Merleau-Ponty is clearly directly drawing from, attempts to assert control often lead to exposure. Seeking recognition, we risk objectification. This drama cannot be reduced to abstract thought. It takes place in the flesh, that is, where we live, are seen, and respond. As such, sexuality, like all embodied life, involves pre-reflective understanding. The body doesn't wait for thought to confer meaning. Instead, it lives meaning. There is a kind of non-conceptual comprehension in erotic perception, a bodily responsiveness that anticipates and shapes sexual situations without the need for reflective awareness. Sexuality, in this sense, is not a discrete act or image, but an atmosphere that pervades our lived experience. It spreads through perception, posture, and movement as a diffuse and expressive presence, coextensive with the body's openness to the world. It's neither entirely conscious nor unconscious, but a mode of being. Through erotic perception, we encounter the other and ourselves not as fixed entities, but as beings in process, caught in the flux of desire, expression, and freedom, and thus as sources of ambiguity. The body is not merely the site of this experience, it is the very medium for it. Sexuality thus becomes a gateway into the fundamental structure of our being in the world, where meaning arises from the body's ongoing dialogue with others and the surrounding environment. Thank you for making it all the way to the end. If you got something out of this video and want to support this work, you can do so in several ways. Liking this video, sharing it with others, subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And if you would like to make a financial contribution, you can do so through the Super Thanks button here on YouTube, or you can be an ongoing contributor over on Patreon, where I offer video transcripts, unedited materials, provide copies of these diagrams, and prioritize questions and comments here on YouTube. The link is below. I would like to thank the following for already supporting this work over on Patreon. And until next time, be well.